Because of her beauty, a girl became the target of jealousy from 3 other girls. Consumed by envy, the 3 of them disfigured her with acid. Driven into despair, the girl eventually took her own life. But not long afterward, the 3 girls began suffering a series of mysterious accidents. Each disaster came without warning, as though something in the darkness was watching them. And the story begins on a remote island. While eating dinner, the young detective Hajime suddenly heard a woman's blood-curdling scream mixed in with the deafening thunder outside. Everyone immediately rushed toward the sound. When the group arrived at the opera house, the horrifying sight before them sent chills down everyone's spine. The massive chandelier hanging above the stage had completely crashed down onto the floor, and beneath the shattered wreckage of the lighting fixture, there was a girl pinned underneath it. Kenzu, the manager of the opera house, initially believed it was just a tragic accident, but Hajime immediately denied that possibility. The cut on the cable was far too clean and precise. It had clearly been deliberately severed by someone. From this, Hajime concluded that the girl crushed beneath the chandelier Hidaka had been murdered. Everyone present was filled with confusion. After all, nobody had left the restaurant before or after the incident. At that moment, the chef Ogata suddenly remembered something strange. The day before Hajime and the others arrived, a man calling himself Kagetsu had checked into the inn. His entire body was wrapped in bandages, but after checking in, he never once left his room. After hearing this clue, everyone immediately headed toward Kagetsu's room. The moment they opened the door, they found the entire room in complete disarray. Miyuki suddenly let out a scream. Written on the bathroom wall was a message scrawled in blood. The instant Hajime read the bloody words, his expression immediately became grave. At the same time, a memory resurfaced in his mind. Not long before this, Hajime had accepted Miyuki's invitation to accompany the school drama club to this remote island for rehearsals of the classic play, The Phantom of the Opera. During rehearsals, Hajime learned from Mitsuhiko that the original lead actress of the play was supposed to be Ryuji's younger sister Fuyuko. Mitsuhiko and Fuyuko had also been lovers, but just before rehearsals officially began, Fuyuko's face was horribly burned by sulfuric acid. Although doctors managed to save her life, her appearance was permanently disfigured. The devastating blow completely shattered Fuyuko emotionally. Several days later, when her friends and family came to visit her, Fuyuko performed one final operatic scene from the hospital rooftop. Afterward, she painfully declared that she had been burned by the flames of hell, yet still longed for heaven. The moment she finished speaking, she jumped from the rooftop to her death. That was why Hajime was so shaken, because the bloody message on the wall was the exact same phrase Fuyuko had spoken before dying. Sendai immediately believed that Fuyuko's vengeful spirit had returned for revenge. His words filled Mitsuhiko with terror. Without hesitation, he decided to leave the island that very night. The others followed Mitsuhiko to the island's only harbor, but to their shock, the boat that had originally been docked there had completely disappeared. It was obvious that someone intended to trap them on the island. Fear quickly spread through the group. After returning to the inn connected to the opera house, everyone began speculating that the series of murders were acts of revenge carried out by Fuyuko's ghost. However, Ryuji refused to believe that theory. In his eyes, his sister had always been kind and gentle. She would never harm innocent people without reason. Hajime agreed with him, even though he still could not figure out the killer's method. He was certain of one thing: the murderer was still somewhere on the island. Filled with unease, everyone returned to their rooms to rest. Just as Miyuki was preparing for bed, she suddenly heard the sound of high heels echoing through the hallway. To her horror, she realized the door to her room had somehow been silently pushed open. In the next instant, a masked figure suddenly appeared and violently grabbed her by the throat. After letting out a sharp scream, Miyuki abruptly woke up from her sleep. Only then did she realize it had all been a nightmare. But moments later, a strange knocking sound suddenly came from outside the window. Then, a masked face slowly appeared outside the glass. The following morning, the ringing of a telephone woke Hajime up. The moment he answered the call, his sleepy expression instantly changed. He hurried toward the back of the inn as fast as he could. Overnight, another tragedy had occurred. This time, the victim was Kiryu, the actress who had replaced Fuyuko as the female lead. Everyone believed Kiryu had committed suicide, but Hajime immediately declared that it was not a suicide scene at all, because there was no platform or object nearby that the victim could have stood on before hanging herself. Hearing this, Miyuki suddenly realized something. The masked figure she had seen twice the night before had not been part of a dream. At that moment, everyone else also came to the same realization. The methods used in both murders perfectly mirrored scenes from the opera they had been rehearsing. Hajime pointed out that this case was a locked room murder. Kiryu's door had been locked from the inside, which meant the killer and the victim could only have exited through the window. The footprints left on the ground served as solid evidence, but strangely, the only footprints found at the scene belonged to the victim herself. There was not a single trace left behind by the killer. This was enough to prove that Kiryu had willingly walked out of the room herself before being attacked and murdered. Ogata analyzed the situation and remarked that according to the progression of the play, the next victim would likely be dragged into the sewer and killed. At that moment, Hajime noticed something strange. The actress Takamori was trembling uncontrollably. Her abnormal reaction made Hajime begin to suspect whether the mysterious man named Kagetsu had ever truly existed at all. That night, Miyuki hurried over to find Hajime. She told him that water droplets kept dripping from the bathroom ceiling in her bedroom. Hajime's first assumption was that the leak came from an upstairs faucet left running, but Miyuki explained that no one had been staying in the room above them. Hajime immediately found that suspicious. After carefully examining the water stains on the ceiling, he realized there were faint traces of blood mixed into the water. Everyone immediately rushed upstairs. In the end, they discovered Ogata's corpse inside the bathtub. At first, everyone assumed Ogata had drowned, but after conducting a closer inspection, Hajime confirmed that the fatal injury was actually a heavy blow to the head. One of Ogata's fake fingernails was also missing. Hajime concluded that Ogata had been murdered somewhere else before the killer moved the body into the bathtub. But what puzzled Hajime was that compared to the previous two murders, this crime scene contained far too many flaws. Because of that, he suspected this murder had been committed impulsively. Just then, Takamori suddenly broke down emotionally and turned to run away. Hajime immediately chased after her. He was convinced that Takamori was hiding a crucial secret. Faced with Hajime's relentless questioning, Takamori finally burst into tears and confessed the truth. Fuyuko's disfigurement had never been an accident. Back then, Takamori became consumed by jealousy, together with Kiryu and Hidaka. She planned to scare Fuyuko using sulfuric acid, but during the process, something went horribly wrong, and Fuyuko's face was permanently disfigured. After learning the truth, Hajime asked Miyuki to take care of Takamori. Then Hajime began reviewing all the clues alone, combining Takamori's confession with the evidence. He quickly identified the motive behind the murders. The killer was most likely someone extremely close to Fuyuko. While deep in thought, Hajime passed by the kitchen and accidentally discovered Fuyuko's diary. Curious, he opened it and began reading. The diary repeatedly mentioned someone whose name began with the letter R. Among everyone still on the island, the only person who fit that description was Fuyuko's older brother Ryuji. Meanwhile, inside the room, Miyuki patiently tried to calm the terrified Takamori. Suddenly, the masked figure smashed through the window and burst inside. The piercing scream immediately alerted Hajime. Just as the masked intruder was about to attack, Hajime arrived in time to stop him. The masked figure abandoned their original target and instead lunged at Hajime. But strangely, the attacker never tried to harm him. Instead, the figure quickly turned and fled the scene. The others rushed over after hearing the commotion, but by then, the masked figure had already disappeared. Ryuji believed the intruder must have realized everyone was coming, which was why they panicked and jumped into the ocean to escape. Hajime noticed that the surface of the windowsill was covered in a thick layer of dust. The moment he reached out and touched it, he instantly understood everything. Afterward, he brought Miyuki to the opera stage. During his investigation, he discovered that once the stage curtain was lowered, the shattered pieces of the chandelier formed a perfectly straight line. This was enough to prove that when Hidaka was killed, the curtain had actually been lowered. But by the time everyone arrived at the crime scene, the curtain had already been completely raised. As Hajime reflected on the first murder case, he remembered that besides the victim's scream, he had also heard the sound of a bell ringing clearly. Hajime headed to the projection room with Miyuki. After searching for a while, they finally found Ogata's missing fake fingernail. The evidence in the case was gradually coming together, yet Hajime still could not shake one lingering doubt. If the killer's motive was purely revenge, then why was Takamori the only one left alive? At that moment, the opera house owner, Kenzu, stepped forward and announced that he had successfully contacted a boat from the mainland. Rescue personnel would soon arrive at the shore to pick everyone up. Just then, Hajime suddenly noticed marks on the fireplace wall where a crossbow had once been mounted, but Kenza claimed that the crossbow had still been there just moments ago. Those words immediately put Hajime on alert. Without hesitation, he gathered everyone into the dining hall. Once everyone had arrived, Hajime instructed them to sit in specific seats according to his arrangement. Then, right in front of everyone, he finally revealed the truth. The man calling himself Kagetsu was the true killer behind the entire case. On the day he checked into the inn, he secretly left the island using an inflatable kayak hidden inside his suitcase. The following day, he returned to the island by blending in with Hajime's group of tourists. Everyone immediately questioned this theory. After all, when Hidaka was killed, everyone had remained inside the restaurant. The killer should not have had any opportunity to commit the crime. Hajime calmly explained, the scream everyone heard that night had merely been a pre-recorded audio tape, which also meant that when they first heard the scream, Hidaka was actually still alive. The real murder took place later. When everyone split up to search for clues, the killer pretended to search alongside the others, then secretly headed to the opera house and waited for the perfect chance to kill Hidaka. To conceal the sounds at the crime scene, the killer activated the mechanism controlling the stage curtain. At the exact moment the curtain moved and the bell rang, the killer decisively cut the chandelier's support cable, causing the massive chandelier to crash down and kill Hidaka instantly. Afterward, the killer raised the curtain again and quietly returned to the group, pretending to discover the tragedy together with everyone else. Later, the killer attempted to destroy the cassette tape containing the recorded scream, but Ogata accidentally discovered it. To cover up the crime, the killer had no choice but to murder Ogata as well. Then came Kiryu's murder. The killer had prepared a rope outside her window beforehand. After calling her room, the killer lured Kiryu to lean out and look outside. The moment she stuck her head out the window, the killer tightened the rope and strangled her to death. Afterward, the killer changed into the victim's shoes and hung her body from a tree branch. Even the supposed escape into the ocean had been nothing more than a carefully staged trick. The killer intentionally created the illusion of jumping into the sea to make everyone believe the murderer had already died. That way, everyone would lower their guard, allowing the killer to continue carrying out the remaining murders, which also meant the killer planned to strike again. Hajime's final deduction filled everyone in the room with terror. He ordered everyone to remain exactly where they were and warned them not to move around carelessly. Once the time came, the killer would expose himself naturally. Inside the dining hall, everyone sat frozen in fear, nervously waiting. When the clock finally struck 10 at night, Sendai suddenly clutched his head and collapsed to the floor. Hajime then declared that Sendai was the murderer behind everything. It turned out, he had already set up a crossbow trap in advance. Once the appointed time arrived, the crossbow would automatically fire. Hajime explained that the seating arrangement in the dining hall was always fixed. He had already deduced Sendai's plan and deliberately switched everyone's seats beforehand. He intentionally seated Sendai in the chair that originally belonged to Takamori, waiting for him to expose himself. The traces on the windowsill were also a crucial piece of evidence. When everyone witnessed the killer apparently leaping out the window, there had been muddy footprints all over the ground below. Yet strangely, the surface of the windowsill itself had remained perfectly clean. Given the height of the window, it would have been impossible to jump out without stepping onto the sill, which meant the killer had never actually jumped into the ocean at all. The mask floating on the sea had merely been discarded intentionally to confuse everyone. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Sendai finally stopped denying everything. He suddenly pulled out a knife and grabbed Takamori hostage. Filled with grief and rage, he began speaking about what Fuyuko had meant to him. Back then, Sendai had been nothing more than a street thug, spending his days fighting and causing trouble. He once believed his life would continue sinking into darkness forever, until the kind-hearted Fuyuko appeared in his life. Like a ray of sunlight, Fuyuko illuminated his bleak world. With her encouragement and companionship, Sendai slowly began turning his life around. The two of them spent peaceful and happy days together, but that quiet happiness was ultimately destroyed by Kiryu, Hidaka, and Takamori. Driven by jealousy, they caused Fuyuko's face to be permanently disfigured. At first, neither Sendai nor Fuyuko knew the truth, but one day, they accidentally overheard Kiryu and the others talking casually about it. Only then did Fuyuko realize that they were the ones responsible for ruining her life. Yet Takamori and the others felt absolutely no guilt. The very next day, Fuyuko chose to end her own life. From that moment on, hatred consumed Sendai's heart. He swore that the three people responsible would pay for what they had done. After saying this, he prepared to kill Takamori. Hajime immediately rushed forward to stop him. He tried to reason with Sendai. Fuyuko had not chosen death because she wanted revenge against others. She simply did not want hatred and malice to consume her heart. She wanted to preserve the purity and kindness within herself, and move toward the peaceful place her soul longed for. Those words deeply shook Sendai. Trembling, he slowly released Takamori. Then he smashed through the glass window and leapt outside. Everyone hurried after him. Standing atop the rooftop, Sendai repeated the very same words Fuyuko had spoken before her death. Then, without hesitation, he jumped. Hajime desperately tried to save him, but Sendai refused. He wanted to go find Fuyuko, but he knew he could never reach heaven because he had also killed the innocent Ogata. Watching Sendai lose all signs of life, Takamori was consumed by overwhelming regret. She bitterly regretted allowing jealousy to control her for even a single moment, ultimately creating a tragedy that could never be undone. Jealousy has the power to destroy even the purest and kindest hearts. True salvation is never achieved through violent revenge. Only by holding onto the kindness within one's heart can a person resist the darkness and avoid being swallowed by the abyss.